One of the clearest signs that a narcissist knows they are guilty is their refusal to take direct accountability. At first, this can be incredibly confusing because most people assume that when someone knows they have done something wrong, the natural response would be to acknowledge it, apologize, and work toward repairing the damage. But narcissists often operate by a very different set of priorities. Their primary concern is not the truth of what happened. Their primary concern is protecting the image they have created for themselves. This image is often carefully maintained and deeply tied to their sense of worth. To admit fault would mean accepting a flaw, a failure, or a weakness, and for many narcissists, that feels far more threatening than the consequences of the wrongdoing itself. When a narcissist is confronted with evidence of their behavior, they rarely respond in a straightforward way. Instead of saying, "You're right, I made a mistake," they begin searching for ways to redirect the conversation. They may focus on small details that have nothing to do with the actual issue. They may question how the information was discovered, criticize the timing of the confrontation, or argue over minor facts while completely ignoring the larger problem. This creates a situation where the discussion becomes tangled in distractions, making it difficult to address the original concern. What makes this behavior especially frustrating is that it can appear convincing on the surface. Narcissists often speak with confidence and certainty, even when they know they are avoiding the truth. They understand that if they can keep the conversation moving away from their actions, they may never have to face genuine accountability. As a result, people around them can become exhausted trying to keep the discussion focused. Instead of receiving answers, they find themselves defending their own perceptions, memories, and emotions. Another common tactic is minimizing the seriousness of what happened. A narcissist may acknowledge a small portion of their behavior while dramatically downplaying its impact. They might say things like, "It wasn't that bad," or "You're making too much of this." This allows them to appear somewhat reasonable without actually accepting responsibility. They give just enough acknowledgement to avoid looking completely dismissive, yet not enough to address the real harm that was caused. In their mind, reducing the significance of the problem makes it easier to escape the obligation to make meaningful changes. Blame shifting is another powerful tool narcissists use when they know they are guilty. Rather than examining their own actions, they search for ways to place responsibility on someone else. They may argue that they only behaved the way they did because of something another person said or did. Suddenly, the focus is no longer on their choices, but on the behavior of those around them. This creates confusion because the conversation transforms from a discussion about accountability into a debate about who is truly at fault. The original issue becomes buried beneath layers of accusation and defensiveness. What many people fail to realize is that this avoidance of accountability is often driven by fear. While narcissists may appear arrogant and self-assured, their sense of self can be surprisingly fragile. Admitting wrongdoing threatens the image they work so hard to protect. They fear being seen as imperfect, flawed, or responsible for causing pain. Rather than facing those uncomfortable feelings, they build defenses designed to keep them at a safe distance from self-reflection. Unfortunately, these defenses often come at the expense of the people around them. This is why conversations with narcissists can feel so circular. You may present clear evidence, explain your concerns calmly, and express exactly how their actions affected you. Yet somehow the discussion never arrives at accountability. It loops through excuses, distractions, justifications, and counterattacks. Hours later, you may find yourself wondering how the conversation drifted so far from the original issue. This is often because the narcissist's goal is not resolution. Their goal is self-protection. In healthy relationships, accountability serves an important purpose. It creates trust. When someone admits a mistake, they demonstrate that honesty matters more than pride. They show a willingness to learn, grow, and repair damage. Accountability strengthens relationships because it reassures others that problems can be addressed openly. Narcissists, however, often see accountability as a threat rather than an opportunity. They view it as a loss of power, a loss of control, or a challenge to the identity they have built. Over time, repeated avoidance of accountability can have a profound effect on those around them. Victims often begin questioning themselves. They wonder whether they are being too sensitive, too demanding, or too critical. They may start doubting their own memories because every attempt to address a problem is met with resistance or distortion. This self-doubt can become one of the most damaging consequences of dealing with a narcissist. The issue is no longer just the original wrongdoing. It becomes the ongoing erosion of confidence and trust in one's own judgment. Understanding this pattern is important because it helps explain why logical arguments rarely succeed. Many people believe that if they can simply provide enough evidence, the narcissist will eventually admit the truth. But the obstacle is not a lack of information. The obstacle is the narcissist's unwillingness to place truth above self-preservation. No amount of proof can force accountability on someone who views accountability as a threat. Recognizing this reality can be freeing. It allows you to stop chasing admissions that may never come. It helps you understand that their refusal to accept responsibility is not necessarily evidence that you are wrong. In many cases, it is evidence that they are deeply invested in protecting themselves from the discomfort of facing the truth. Once you see this pattern clearly, you become less vulnerable to the confusion it creates and more capable of trusting what you already know. One of the most revealing things a narcissist does when they know they are guilty is rewrite the story. This behavior goes far beyond simple dishonesty or avoiding a difficult conversation. It is a calculated attempt to reshape reality in a way that protects their image, preserves their sense of control, and prevents them from facing the consequences of their actions. If you've ever found yourself leaving a conversation with a narcissist feeling confused, questioning your memory, or wondering whether an event happened the way you remember it, there is a good chance you have experienced this tactic firsthand. When most people make a mistake, they may feel uncomfortable, embarrassed, or defensive, but they generally understand that the facts remain the facts. A narcissist often approaches the situation differently. Instead of adapting their self-image to fit reality, they try to adapt reality to fit their self-image because they see themselves as the victim, the hero, the misunderstood person, or the one who is always right. Any evidence that contradicts that identity becomes a threat. Rather than accepting the contradiction, they begin rewriting the narrative. This process can start with something subtle. A narcissist may leave out important details when telling a story to others. They may carefully select certain facts while ignoring others that would make them look responsible. The version they present is not necessarily a complete fabrication. In fact, the most convincing distortions often contain pieces of truth. The problem is that those truths are arranged in a way that creates a false conclusion. By controlling which details are emphasized and which are omitted, they can make themselves appear innocent while making someone else appear unreasonable or unfair. For example, imagine a situation where a narcissist repeatedly breaks promises and disappoints someone close to them. When confronted, they may not deny that the confrontation occurred. Instead, they focus entirely on the emotional reaction of the other person. They tell others that they were yelled at, criticized, or treated harshly. What they conveniently leave out is the long pattern of behavior that led to that reaction. As a result, anyone hearing the story receives a distorted picture of what actually happened. The narcissist appears to be the victim of an overreaction rather than the person whose actions created the conflict. Another common form of story rewriting involves changing details over time. At first, they may deny something happened altogether. Later, when evidence emerges, they may admit that it happened, but insist it was insignificant. If further proof appears, they may claim their intentions were misunderstood. Each version shifts slightly depending on what is necessary to avoid responsibility. The facts are not stable because the goal is not accuracy. The goal is protection. This constant reshaping of reality can be deeply unsettling for those around them. Human beings naturally rely on shared understanding to maintain trust and connection. When two people experience an event, there is usually some agreement about what occurred, even if they interpret it differently. Narcissists disrupt this process by treating facts as flexible and negotiable. What happened yesterday may suddenly be denied today. Statements they clearly made may be claimed to have never been said. Promises they enthusiastically agreed to may be presented as misunderstandings created by someone else's assumptions. Over time, this can lead to a phenomenon often described as self-doubt. The person dealing with the narcissist begins questioning their own memory and perception. They replay conversations in their mind, wondering whether they misunderstood something. They search for explanations that make sense of the contradictions. Because most people assume others are generally trying to be truthful, they struggle to understand why someone would so confidently present a version of reality that conflicts with observable facts. The narcissist's confidence plays a major role in making these distortions effective. They rarely appear uncertain when rewriting events. They speak with conviction, certainty, and authority. Even when their version of the story changes multiple times, they present each new version as though it is unquestionably true. This confidence can make others hesitate to trust their own recollections. After all, when someone speaks with absolute certainty, it is easy to wonder whether they know something you don't. Rewriting the story also allows narcissists to maintain control over how others perceive them. Their reputation often matters enormously to them. They want to be seen as kind, intelligent, successful, caring, or morally superior. When their actions threaten that image, altering the narrative becomes a form of damage control. Rather than addressing the behavior itself, they focus on managing perceptions. If enough people believe their version of events, they can avoid criticism and preserve the admiration or sympathy they desire. In some cases, the narcissist may recruit others into the rewritten narrative. Friends, family members, coworkers, or acquaintances may hear only the carefully edited version of events. Because these individuals often lack full context, they may accept the narcissist's account as truthful. This can leave the actual victim feeling isolated and misunderstood. Not only are they dealing with the original wrongdoing, but they are also forced to watch as others embrace a distorted version of reality. One reason this tactic is so effective is that it exploits a fundamental human desire for consistency. Most people assume that if someone repeats a story often enough and confidently enough, there must be some truth to it. Narcissists understand this instinct, whether consciously or unconsciously. Repetition becomes a tool. The more often they tell their version of events, the more familiar it becomes, and familiarity can sometimes be mistaken for truth. Perhaps the most damaging aspect of story rewriting is that it prevents genuine resolution. Healthy conflict resolution requires honesty about what happened. It requires both parties to acknowledge reality, even when it is uncomfortable. A narcissist who continuously rewrites events creates an environment where accountability becomes nearly impossible. Problems remain unresolved because the foundation necessary for resolution, the truth itself, is constantly being altered. This pattern can leave people feeling trapped in endless arguments that never lead anywhere. Every attempt to address the issue is met with a new version of the story, a different explanation, or a revised interpretation of events. The facts become moving targets, impossible to pin down. What began as a simple discussion about behavior transforms into a battle over reality itself. The narcissist may never directly admit their guilt, but their relentless effort to reshape the narrative often reveals far more than an honest confession ever could. One of the most confusing and frustrating things narcissists do when they know they are guilty is project their guilt onto other people. This behavior can leave victims feeling disoriented, defensive, and emotionally drained because the person who caused the problem suddenly begins acting as though they are the one who has been wronged. Instead of taking responsibility for their actions, the narcissist shifts attention away from themselves by accusing someone else of the very behavior they are guilty of. The result is a conversation that becomes less about the truth and more about confusion, self-doubt, and distraction. Projection is a psychological defense mechanism that allows people to avoid uncomfortable feelings about themselves by attributing those feelings, motives, or behaviors to others. While many people engage in projection occasionally, narcissists often rely on it heavily because accepting responsibility threatens the carefully constructed image they have of themselves. They want to see themselves as superior, justified, intelligent, innocent, or morally right. When evidence emerges that contradicts that image, they experience a deep sense of discomfort. Rather than facing that discomfort directly, they push it outward and place it on someone else. And imagine a narcissist who has been dishonest. They know they have lied, hidden information, or manipulated facts. Instead of admitting what they have done, they begin accusing another person of being dishonest. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about their deception. The focus shifts to defending against accusations that may have little or no basis in reality. The narcissist's wrongdoing becomes buried beneath a cloud of suspicion and confusion. By putting someone else on the defensive, they temporarily escape scrutiny. This tactic is effective because most people are not expecting it. When confronted with a problem, they assume the discussion will remain focused on that issue. They do not anticipate that the person responsible will suddenly accuse them of the same behavior. As a result, they often become distracted trying to clear their name. They explain themselves, defend their intentions, and argue against the false accusations. Meanwhile, the narcissist successfully redirects attention away from their own conduct. One of the most common examples of projection occurs in relationships involving trust. A narcissist who is hiding something may become unusually suspicious of their partner. They may make frequent accusations, question innocent behavior, demand explanations, or insist that their partner is being secretive. To an outside observer, it may seem as though the narcissist is deeply concerned about honesty. In reality, their accusations often reflect their own internal awareness of what they are doing. The guilt they cannot tolerate within themselves becomes something they claim to see in another person. Projection can also appear in emotional conflicts. A narcissist who is controlling may accuse others of trying to control them. A person who constantly manipulates situations may complain about being manipulated. Someone who lacks empathy may claim that everyone around them is selfish and uncaring. The accusations often mirror the narcissist's own behavior so closely that the situation becomes almost ironic. Yet because the accusations are delivered with confidence and conviction, they can still have a powerful impact on those who hear them. Another reason projection is so damaging is that it attacks a person's sense of identity. When someone repeatedly accuses you of qualities you do not possess, you naturally want to defend yourself. You want to explain who you really are. You want the truth to be recognized. Narcissists often exploit this desire. They make accusations that force others into a defensive position, consuming emotional energy that could otherwise be used to hold them accountable. The more time spent defending against false claims, the less time spent examining the narcissist's behavior. Over time, repeated projection can cause significant psychological harm. Victims may begin questioning themselves. They wonder whether there is some truth hidden within the accusations. Even when they know the claims are unfair, hearing them repeatedly can create doubt. Human beings are influenced by repetition, especially when accusations come from someone emotionally significant. What begins as frustration can gradually turn into confusion and self-examination. The victim starts analyzing every action, every decision, and every motive, searching for evidence that they are not what the narcissist claims. This self-doubt is often exactly what the narcissist wants. A confused person is easier to control than a confident one. When someone is busy questioning themselves, they are less likely to challenge manipulation, establish boundaries, or recognize unhealthy patterns. Projection creates a smokescreen that obscures reality. The narcissist remains hidden behind the accusations, while the victim becomes consumed with proving their innocence. Projection is particularly powerful because it contains a grain of emotional truth, not about the accused person, but about the narcissist. The accusations often reveal what the narcissist is struggling to acknowledge within themselves. Their words become an indirect confession. The qualities they attack most aggressively are frequently the qualities they fear being exposed for possessing. In this sense, projection can provide valuable insight into their internal world. The behaviors they condemn in others often point directly toward issues they refuse to confront in themselves. Many people make the mistake of believing that if they explain themselves clearly enough, the narcissist will eventually understand. They assume the accusations are based on misunderstandings that can be corrected through communication. Unfortunately, projection is not usually driven by a lack of information. It is driven by a need for self-protection. The narcissist is not necessarily seeking the truth. They are seeking relief from the discomfort of acknowledging their own flaws and actions. Because of this, evidence and logic often have little effect. The experience can feel like standing in front of a distorted mirror. No matter what you do, the reflection being presented bears little resemblance to reality. The narcissist insists that you are the dishonest one, the manipulative one, the selfish one, or the controlling one, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. The more you try to correct the image, the more energy you expend. Meanwhile, the real issue remains untouched and unresolved. Recognizing projection is an important step toward protecting yourself from its effects. When you understand that these accusations may reveal more about the narcissist than about you, it becomes easier to step back and evaluate the situation objectively. Instead of immediately defending yourself, you begin to notice patterns. You observe how accusations emerge whenever accountability approaches. You see how attention is redirected at critical moments. You recognize that the person making the accusation may be describing their own behavior rather than yours. What once felt like a confusing contradiction begins to make sense, revealing a strategy designed not to uncover the truth, but to hide from it. One of the most effective and emotionally confusing tactics narcissists use when they know they are guilty is playing the victim. At first glance, this behavior can seem completely contradictory. After all, if someone has clearly caused harm, lied, manipulated, betrayed trust, or treated another person unfairly, why would they position themselves as the injured party? Yet this is exactly what many narcissists do when accountability begins closing in on them. Instead of addressing the pain they caused, they shift attention to their own suffering, creating a narrative in which they appear misunderstood, unfairly criticized, or emotionally wounded. This tactic allows them to avoid responsibility while simultaneously attracting sympathy and support from others. The reason this strategy is so powerful is because it targets one of the strongest qualities many healthy people possess: empathy. Most people do not enjoy seeing someone in pain. When they hear another person express sadness, disappointment, loneliness, or emotional distress, their natural instinct is to listen, comfort, and understand. Narcissists often take advantage of this instinct. When confronted about their behavior, they quickly redirect the conversation away from the issue at hand and toward their own feelings. Suddenly, the focus is no longer on what they did. The focus becomes how difficult the confrontation is for them. For example, a narcissist who has broken a promise may respond to criticism by talking about the stress they have been under. Rather than discussing the disappointment they caused, they describe how overwhelmed, exhausted, or misunderstood they feel. A narcissist who has betrayed someone's trust may focus on how painful it is to be questioned. Instead of addressing the betrayal, they speak about how hurt they are by the lack of confidence being shown toward them. The original issue begins to fade into the background as attention shifts toward comforting the very person who created the problem. This role reversal can be incredibly disorienting. The person who was harmed enters the conversation seeking answers, accountability, or resolution. Yet by the end of the discussion, they may find themselves apologizing, offering reassurance, or feeling guilty for expressing their concerns. The emotional focus has completely shifted. The narcissist successfully transforms from the source of the problem into the center of sympathy. One reason narcissists use this tactic is because it protects their self-image. Admitting guilt requires acknowledging personal flaws and accepting responsibility for the consequences of one's actions. For narcissists, this can feel deeply threatening. Their sense of self is often built around the belief that they are right, superior, special, or unjustly treated by others. Accepting fault would challenge that identity. By portraying themselves as victims, they avoid confronting uncomfortable truths about their behavior. Instead of asking, what did I do wrong? They focus on, how am I being mistreated? This pattern often becomes especially noticeable during conflicts. Healthy individuals typically engage in some level of self-reflection when disagreements arise. They may consider their role in the situation and evaluate whether they contributed to the problem. Narcissists often move in the opposite direction. The moment accountability enters the conversation, they begin collecting evidence to support their victim narrative. Every criticism becomes an attack. Every boundary becomes rejection. Every consequence becomes persecution. They reinterpret events through a lens that allows them to maintain innocence while assigning blame elsewhere. Another aspect of victim playing involves exaggerating or distorting hardships. Narcissists may draw attention to difficult experiences from their past, personal struggles, or emotional wounds whenever they are confronted about current behavior. While everyone experiences hardship, the issue arises when these experiences are used as shields against accountability. Instead of acknowledging harm caused in the present, they point to suffering from the past as a reason they should not be held responsible. The message becomes clear. Because they have experienced pain, their actions should be excused or overlooked. This can create a complicated emotional dilemma for those around them. Compassionate people often recognize that pain influences behavior. They understand that difficult experiences can leave lasting scars. As a result, they may become hesitant to hold the narcissist accountable. They begin making excuses on the narcissist's behalf, believing that understanding should replace responsibility. While empathy is valuable, it becomes problematic when it allows harmful behavior to continue without consequences. Victim playing also serves another important function for narcissists. It helps them recruit allies. When they present themselves as wronged or unfairly treated, they often seek validation from friends, family members, coworkers, or social circles. These individuals may hear only a carefully edited version of events. The narcissist highlights their own pain while minimizing or omitting the harm they caused. Because people naturally sympathize with those who appear to be suffering, many are drawn into supporting the narcissist's perspective without realizing they are seeing only part of the story. As this pattern continues, the actual victim may begin feeling isolated and misunderstood. Not only are they dealing with the original wrongdoing, but they may also find themselves portrayed as cruel, demanding, unforgiving, or unreasonable. Their attempts to seek accountability become evidence used against them. The more they push for answers, the more the narcissist emphasizes their own suffering. This creates a frustrating dynamic in which speaking up leads to further accusations rather than resolution. Over time, repeated exposure to this behavior can have significant emotional consequences. Victims may begin suppressing their own feelings to avoid triggering the narcissist's victim narrative. They become reluctant to express disappointment, frustration, or hurt because they know the conversation will quickly turn toward comforting the narcissist instead. Their own needs gradually shrink while the narcissist's emotional demands continue to expand. What began as a relationship between two people becomes a situation where one person's feelings dominate every interaction. Perhaps the most deceptive aspect of victim playing is that it often contains elements of genuine emotion. Narcissists may truly feel hurt, rejected, criticized, or misunderstood when confronted. The emotions themselves can be real. The problem is not necessarily the existence of those feelings, but the way they are used. Instead of serving as a starting point for self-reflection and growth, they become tools for avoiding responsibility. Their emotional discomfort takes precedence over the harm they caused, ensuring that accountability remains just out of reach. Understanding this pattern makes it easier to recognize what is happening during these interactions. When a narcissist suddenly shifts the focus to their own pain immediately after being confronted, it is worth asking whether the discussion is moving toward resolution or away from it. Genuine accountability includes acknowledging harm, accepting responsibility, and working to repair trust. Playing the victim achieves the opposite. It redirects attention, generates sympathy, and protects the narcissist from facing the consequences of their actions while leaving others burdened with emotions that were never theirs to carry.